In part 1, journalist Daniel visits a vampire, Louis, to interview him, hence the title. Louis recalls when he was turned into a vampire by a man named Lestat around 1910 in Louisiana. Then Louis ends up having to leave his family as he gets too close to eating his own baby nephew. Let's continue recapping this Twilight series for gay people. While sitting on a bench, Louis suggests to Lestat that they could feed on animals instead of humans. Lestat dismisses the idea, insisting animal blood wouldn't suffice for them. This the equivalent to eating them impossible burgers. Louis then proposes they could target only bad people by reading their minds. Lestat scoffs at the notion, arguing that hunting is driven by pure instinct. Despite Louis's plea, Lestat eventually agrees to try. They roam New Orleans, eavesdropping on thoughts. Louis finds reasons to spare everyone they encounter, even those who seem morally questionable. Identifying a man who preys on the vulnerable, Louis hesitates about feeding on him. Before Louis decides, Lestat swiftly takes the man down an alley. Horrified, Louis refuses to drink the man's blood and chooses to feed on a passing cat instead. So, the gay man do like eating pussy. Later, they visit Azalea Hall to hear a new singer named Antoinette perform. Sitting together, Lestat remains upset with Louis. Louis confesses he's decided to stop killing humans and will survive on animal blood instead. A vampire's version of veganism. This only worsens their conflict, with Lestat ridiculing Louis's decision. Trying to distract himself, Lestat shifts his focus to the pianist, Morton, criticizing his musical skills. Others challenge Lestat to show if he can do better, which he eagerly accepts. This annoys Louis because this isn't Lester's genre of music. In New Orleans, they used to Lil Wayne. Lestat starts with Bach, but the audience isn't impressed, prompting complaints about his choice and performance. Morton jokes about Lestat on stage, earning laughs from the crowd. Lestat responds by elevating his performance, effortlessly switching to ragtime. The audience cheers, and Morton joins him on the piano. Okay, white man's got flavor. As Lestat takes over Morton's duties, Louis notices Lestat feeding on humans out of his view, respecting Louis's decision to abstain. Louis grows weaker each day, surviving on rats and small animals. He becomes pale, irritable, and struggles with simple tasks like reading and conversation. His desire for intimacy fades. This is literally me on antidepressants. Meanwhile, Lestat becomes closer to Antoinette, openly flirting with her. One day he brings her to Louis's room, where things escalate. They invite Louis to join them, but he declines because Antoinette isn't an Antonio. He goes hunting instead. Later that evening, Louis confronts Lestat, upset that Lestat didn't kill Antoinette after their encounter. Lestat explains he spared her due to her talents, not wanting to harm her. Louis questions why he isn't enough for Lestat, who laughs and embraces him, stating he enjoys variety in their eternal nights together. Even my two dads think this is gay. The mood changes when Louis asserts his freedom to be with others, to which Lestat reluctantly agrees repeatedly. Meanwhile, as World War I brings soldiers through New Orleans, the city enacts segregation laws to accommodate white visitors, threatening Louis's brothel businesses. Any black prostitutes had to move, but Louis was able to find a loophole. During a poker game at his club, Louis faces off with influential figures offering to buy his properties in segregated areas at a steep discount. Before Louis can respond, his old friend Jonah, now in uniform, seeks him out. They briefly catch up, but tension mounts when Louis sees Lestat kissing Antoinette. Louis suggests taking Jonah for a drive. I'm sure that's not the only thing Jonah will be riding tonight. During their conversation, Jonah asks about Louis's romantic life. Louis reveals he has a male partner who, despite not being perfect, holds great significance to him. Tension builds between Louis and Jonah, leading to a passionate encounter of Jonah seeing how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. Louis struggles with his vampiric urges, his fangs emerging as he fights the temptation by biting his wrist. Returning home, he discusses his whereabouts with Lestat, noticing mud on Lestat's boots before retiring for the night. The following evening, Louis arrives late at Grace's house for his niece's birthday party. Despite being the family's main provider, he's blocked from entry by his mother and brother-in-law, who fear him and label him as evil. In a fit of rage, Louis accidentally damages the door, frightening Grace and her children. His mother says there is the devil she knows. Feeling rejected and angry, Louis returns home to find Lestat entertaining drunken soldiers, hoping to be spit-roasted by all of them. Lestat informs Louis that Storyville, his business, faces imminent closure due to the segregation laws. Louis demands Lestat send the soldiers away, which he does using his powers. Alone, Louis and Lestat argue. Lestat admits he followed Louis and Jonah, overheard their conversation, and confesses to feeling jealous and possessive. He insists his affair with Antoinette meant nothing, as he had no emotional attachment to her. Louis says Lestat took everything from him. He can't even see his own family. Afterwards, Louis confronts Alderman about the targeted attacks on black businesses in Storyville, accusing him of discrimination against people of color while benefiting white businesses. Alderman proposes buying Louis properties at a steep discount, further infuriating him. "Oh, hell nah, I would feed on these two real quick." Plus, Alderman got a lot of meat on his bones. Louis reacts by banning white patrons from his establishments, escalating tensions. Police harassment intensifies, with vandalism and fabricated charges aimed at driving him out. Overwhelmed and seeking revenge, Louis stops feeding altogether, consumed by thoughts of retribution. Driven by despair, Louis targets Alderman, whom he blames for his downfall. Confronting Alderman alone in his office, Louis faces Alderman's mockery and gunfire, which fails to harm him. Louis retaliates, viciously attacking him by turning him into Vincent van Gogh. "Can you hear me now?" He slashes the oinky some more, then feeds. This is probably equivalent to eating bacon to us. The next morning, Alderman's mutilated body is discovered on display outside City Hall, evoking both pride and smugness from Lestat. However, Louis claims he did it for justice, not himself. As chaos erupts with white citizens setting fires, Louis wanders through the destruction, offering aid to those affected, since it was him who caused this. Amidst the turmoil, Louis hears a child's cries from a burning building and rushes in to rescue her. In the present, Louis reveals this child to be Claudia, whom he saved during that chaotic night. In the next episode, Reid, Louis' servant, leads Daniel to a study where Claudia's journals are spread out. In the journals, Claudia recounts the fire that consumed her home and her aunt, praying for a quick end when Louis, whom she calls her Black Angel, bursts through to rescue her. Louis brings the badly burned Claudia to Lestat, whom Claudia dubs her White Angel. Desperate to save her life and burdened by guilt over Storyville's destruction, Louis pleads with Lestat to turn Claudia into a vampire. Reluctantly, Lestat agrees, biting Claudia's neck as she cries out in pain. This is the Vampire Adoption Agency. Claudia quickly adapts to her new life as a vampire, full of curiosity and questions like any teenager. Louis loves being her father and eagerly answers her inquiries. He reveals their telepathic abilities when she asks how he found her in the fire. Lestat explains he can't hear their thoughts, a consequence of creating vampires, which makes Lestat upset when they communicate this way. Lestat and Louis take Claudia on her first hunt. At a fountain, she shows a little interest in a drunk man, prompting Louis to say she takes after him in her reluctance to feed. Suddenly, Claudia dashes off, catching a scent, and they chase after her. Like a little gremlin in a scary movie, she starts humming, attracting a police officer. Ignoring his questions, she bites his neck. Louis saves her by pulling her away just before the officer dies, and Lestat mocks Louis's earlier comment. On the way home, Louis advises Claudia to avoid killing cops. Distracted by the thoughts and smells around her, she only half listens and begs for more food. Lestat complains about her eternal adolescence, and while they argue, Claudia slips away to feed. The family settles into a routine. Claudia writes in her journal about her antics on the way to the coffin she shares with Louis, which annoys Lestat even through the coffin's lid. Irritated, he vents to Louis in French, which Claudia notes in her journal, anticipating their argument. "This the sweetest, gayest shit I done ever seen." They visit a funeral home for Claudia to test coffins, claiming it's for her heart condition. The shopkeeper's skepticism leads to his death at Lestat's hands, and Claudia gets her pink satin-lined coffin. She enjoys her own space to write and think, and silently observes Lestat joining Louis in his coffin at night. Oh, they doing the nasty, matching each other's freak. On a boat trip, Louis hunts fish while Claudia complains about Lestat's secrets. She asks about how love between two men work. "Well, Claudia, you put it in the fudge factory." She accuses Lestat of cheating, but Louis clarifies he asked Lestat to hunt away from home. Lestat likes a buffet, eating everything in sight. Louis grabs a fish and Claudia wonders how Louis likes fishy things if he's gay. Louis warns Claudia about the consequences of killings, referencing Storyville's destruction. Returning to Claudia's journals, Claudia fixates on her age unlike Louis and Lestat, who are already adults. When Lestat gives her a necklace crafted from a former French crown jewel, she wonders aloud when she'll grow into it. Louis, Lestat, and Claudia live like a typical American vampire family, watching films, playing games, and arguing. Their peace is disrupted by a late-night call about Louis's mother's death. At the wake, Grace is disturbed by Claudia's intense gaze at their mother and confronts her. Louis explains they adopted Claudia after the fires. Grace and her husband criticize Louis for adopting a child given his Lady Gaga lifestyle and ask him to give up the house. Claudia asks to leave, and the family departs the wake. Later, Lestat takes her to an isolated area to hunt couples, showing her the dynamics of intimacy and power. Claudia approaches a parked car, drawn to the couple doing the Titanic inside the car. When they try to escape, she feeds on the man while the woman runs into Lestat's welcoming arms. Claudia's exposure to intimacy frustrates her, feeling like a young woman in a girl's body. She changes her wardrobe to appear more mature. One night, Claudia telepathically hears a group of white women mocking her for dressing beyond her years. "I'd bitch slap all three of them in a row." Enraged, Claudia's fangs come out, startling a nearby horse. The carriage driver, Charlie, offers her a ride home. Claudia finds herself attracted to him, especially since his route passes her house each night. She eagerly waits on her balcony for him, where he throws flowers for her below. Louis starts questioning Claudia telepathically, but she shuts him out. Charlie takes her for ice cream, but Claudia can't fully appreciate the dessert's taste. When Claudia asks if Charlie usually treats girls to ice cream as a first date, Charlie hesitates to call it a date until Claudia convinces him she's older. Claudia says, "Trying to strike a chord, but I'm not a minor." This somehow convinces Charlie. They make out in his carriage, but Claudia can't resist the temptation and accidentally drains him. She brings Charlie home, begging her parents to save him like they saved her, but it's too late. Lestat forces her to watch as his body burns, teaching her not to get close to mortals because they'll end up dying. Louis enters the study as Daniel takes a break from reading. Daniel starts the recording and asks where the diaries were during their last talk in 1973. Louis tells him the diaries were scattered, but Daniel doesn't believe his bullshit. Louis tells Daniel he loved Claudia with his whole being. He admits he was ashamed of failing his daughter. Their conversation moves to Charlie's death in 1923, with Louis quoting passages from Claudia's diaries word for word. Daniel insinuates that Claudia was there to fix Louis and Lestat's relationship, and Louis can't help but agree. Back to the journals, Claudia is overwhelmed with grief over Charlie's death. Louis and Lestat argue constantly, not even switching to French to spare her feelings. Claudia resents being turned into a vampire at 14, upset with living in the same adolescent body despite her mental age getting older. Claudia switches a lever to allow sunlight inside the house and starts getting a major sunburn. She says she's just starting to have fun, and that's the end of the 4th episode. What do you guys think of this series so far? Should we cover more? I really like the addition of Claudia into their dynamic. However, I worry that the man she'll end up with will be a PDF file and not actually love Claudia for Claudia.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.